Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. It is Friday, and that means we are talking fights. Today we have myself and Jerry Walker. Jerry, how's it going? And are you pumped for the fights this weekend?
I mean, always, anytime it's a fight weekend, it always adds that little extra. It's a great weekend of sport all around. So excited for that. Otherwise, just doing good. It's a
Yeah,
nice day out here. So enjoy the sun a little bit earlier. Played some golf, not very well. But hey, it's fun. And now we get to talk about fights, which is always a great time. How are
yeah.
you doing this Friday?
Not bad at all. Congratulations on the good weather. We got hail up in Michigan, so not big hail, nothing too crazy, but enough where you can hear it hitting the house, and you're like, all right, come on, what the hell? It's October and we're getting hail. What are we
Yes.
doing? So
Starting to get cold up there yet? Or
yeah, it's about 50 today, so not great, but it is what it is, as Max Holloway would say. All right, getting into these fights. Today we're gonna pretty much talk about the UFC Vegas 80 main card, and we are going to touch on two news stories: Derek Brunson going to the PFL, and Arnold Allen signing to fight Movsar Evelev. So that is the docket for today, and obviously we're going to start right at the UFC Vegas 80 main event. Bobby Green, Grant Dawson. Jerry, what are your thoughts?
First of all, I mean, just coming into this, we've spoken on the Daily Show many times before about how this card is really good, just doesn't have a really big main event. And I mean, Dawson's what, ranked 10th at the moment in the lightweight division,
Mm-hmm.
and Bobby Green isn't even ranked. So there's that little bit. There's all that stuff aside, this fight's going to be fun. Two guys that like throwing hands, like going at it. I don't remember a single time where I've seen a boring Bobby Green fight. Maybe the Islam one, but that's not surprising. He took that one on very short notice against the now lightweight champ. I'm very excited for this fight. It's going to be fun. Both of them are, I mean, Dawson's solid. He's won 3 straight. Really, he hasn't lost since he joined the UFC, since even in his contender series fight he won. Does have a draw in there, but hey, Bobby Green, meanwhile, I think it's he just takes tough fights. So his record's not exactly reflective, or at least his recent record isn't really reflective of him as a fighter, I would say. Sure, he beat Tony Ferguson. A lot of people have at the moment. Nothing against Tony, but no longer as big a name. No contest with Jared Gordon, and then lost to Islam and Drew Dober, which those are two tough fights. And I mean, Dober's on the undercard of this one, or on the main card of this one as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing about Bobby Green is the second that Bobby Green got into the UFC, he's always been fun. He's always been entertaining, and he has always fought tough guys. So Bobby Green is one of the guys where I believe his record is 11 and 9 in the UFC, or something around there, close to 500, almost 20 fights. But it's like, yeah, he's a good fighter. Like a lot of guys can rack up a lot of wins fighting bums. Bobby Green did not do that, so credit to him for that. And I'm really interested in this matchup because two very different fighters. Bobby Green, primarily a striker, did get the sub in his last time out, but he's primarily a striker. Really good boxing. He fights with the hands low, lots of head movement. Very, very unique striker as well. And Grant Dawson, much more of a grappler. He wants to take you down. Really good takedowns. Really good top control. And one of the things that I'm most interested in is, can Bobby Green defend the takedowns? And what does Grant Dawson look if this fight? What does Grant Dawson look like if this fight goes late? I believe this is his first 5-round fight, and the draw you mentioned, it ended up being a draw because he was fighting Rick Glenn, who's also on this card. But Dawson dominated the first 2 rounds. Rick Glenn gets a 10-8 in round 3 because Dawson gassed out. He has looked better in the gas tank department lately, but still, I'm interested to see what it looks like if it gets to round 4 and round 5. So this may not be the biggest like name value for a main event, but there are some things that I'm interested in watching, seeing how they play out, especially when you have Bobby Green and Grant Dawson, who are going to see in big fights moving forward. It's not like these guys are going to disappear after this fight.
No, not at all. And I mean, you brought up the time and like him not really making it that late in rounds. Even Bobby Green, he does have fights go the distance, but even in any of his 5-round fights, it always seems to end early. I can think of the Islam one, which Obviously, that's a crazy fight. Was done in the first round. Recently got a finishes in the third round, but it shows that he's still pushing forward and still can cause damage and get the finishes even late in the round. So that is something to watch out for that I hadn't really thought about until you brought it up.
Hmm. Yeah, and how do you see this fight playing out? Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the cardio, the grappling, the striking. How do you see this going down when fight night rolls around?
I always tend to lean towards the guy with the wrestling and more grappling experience in these kind of mix of style fights, but I don't really know on this one. This one's like that weird toss up because Bobby Green can do stuff on the ground. He does have 9 submissions of his 30 wins, so it's not like he's all knockouts or all decisions. He's very much averaged out on all three of those. But I do think Dawson's kind of trending in the right direction. He's looked very, very good in all of his fights so far, apart from that draw, which he bounced back and got 3 straight wins, including 2 rear naked choke submissions. So I like him. I think he's going to get it done. I think it will be on the ground, but I'm not 100% convinced on that because Bobby Green can surprise, and he will make it a very, very tough fight. So I'm talking right to him at the weigh-in today, so I don't know what was being said, but something, they're going to be talking in the cage, and it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. I think this is really interesting as well, just because it's like Bobby Green is a guy that typically fights a little bit better than people expect.
Yeah.
And if he's able to defend takedowns or make Dawson work enough when those takedowns are being attempted, he may have success in the later rounds. And as long as this fight is standing, Bobby Green will be able to box Grant Dawson up badly. Um, I do lean towards Dawson because from what I've seen of Dawson, once he gets takedowns, and he has good takedowns, so that's good to know. But once he gets the fight to the ground, heavy top pressure, and he's good at getting the body triangle. So I think we're going to see Dawson be hesitant on the feet, eventually get in on a takedown. And then once he gets a takedown, I think that is going to be, the end of the round because he's going to either, have a lot of heavy top pressure or he's going to get to that backpack. So I think that's how this fight goes early, and then eventually becomes a position where Dawson chips away at him a little bit and then gets a submission. Personally, I put round 3 in our previews. That's going to come out in a little bit. So that's kind of where my head is at. And also, last thing I'll add here, Grant Dawson, much, much more physical. I mean, Bobby Green, great movement, great boxing, but Grant Dawson is going to be much, much stronger. Like once he gets a hold of Bobby Green, this fight's going to change a lot. So that's also going to be useful in these grappling exchanges.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, I think the key for Bobby Green is if he can avoid those takedowns and make this a long 4 or 5 round fight, then that goes in his favor completely. I just don't think he's going to be able to stop the physicality of Dawson, and I think the takedown will come at some point, and it'll be finished there.
I agree with you. Bobby Green's going to have to be on his bike. He's going to have to be moving. He's going to have to be backpedaling, circling off the cage. He's going to have lots of great movement, which is very, very tough. But Bobby Green might be able to do it. So it'll be worth watching out for. And then in the co-main event, this is a fight that I am really looking forward to. We have Joe Pyfer and Abdul Razak Al Hassan. Joe Pyfer, obviously a big hyped up prospect after his Dana White Contender Series knockout. He's gotten 2 knockouts in the UFC since then. So what are your expectations for this fight? And this is kind of a step up in competition for the prospect Joe Pyfer as well.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's going to be the biggest fight he's had so far. Sure, he fought Mirshak, but I don't think that's really that great of a win at times. He's definitely kind of very much a veteran of the game, and that's what he's getting in this fight as well. Razak Al Hassan is 38 years old. That is a very big disadvantage there for him. I mean, Pfeiffer's looked so good since his Contender Series, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets it done again. He does have the grappling. He's been competing in some of those events, I'm pretty sure, I think. And then he obviously has got a couple knockouts as well. So he's a very well rounded fighter by all matters. And it's going to be a tough one for Razak Al Hassan, who he's been very much kind of down recently. Lost 3 straight, and then won 2 of his last 3 since then. It's going to be a tough one for the aging veteran.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. And to add on, Al Hassan is a knockout guy, right? If Al Hassan wins a fight, it's gonna be by knockout. And I believe every single fight in his career that he's won has been a knockout victory. And I believe all but one came in the first round, and the one that was a second round knockout was against Claudio Ribeiro his last time out, and that was 30, 45 seconds, very, very early into that second round. So I think Joe Pyfer is the more talented fighter in every aspect of MMA. He's going to be much bigger because El Hassan's a 170 pounder who's moved up to 185 late in his career. Joe Pyfer, I think, has more technical boxing skills. Joe Pyfer is a much better grappler than people give him credit for. I mean, he's got a grappling win over Gerald Meerschaert, and that's Gerald Meerschaert's like go-to UFC skill. In both of Joe Pyfer's Dana White Contender Series bouts, he landed a takedown. In the Ozzy Diaz fight, he landed a takedown and got to a body triangle. He trains in Philly with Sean Brady, who's a great grappler. So I think in cardio-wise, Joe Pyfer, we haven't really seen his cardio, but on the flip side, we've seen Al Hassan really struggle in fights that escape the first round. So I think Joe Pyfer has this fight covered in about 99% of mixed martial arts. The issue is Al Hassan has one-hitter power. Like Al Hassan gets crazy, throws big shots, and if he lands, you go down. So I think for Pyfer, it's as long as he can avoid that big shot, I think he's going to win. So I'm big on Pyfer here. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to the point you just made about the stamina and the fitness of these two guys, it's definitely we haven't seen much from Pyfer, but I definitely think he has more because all of Hassan's fights that have gone out of the first round, barring that one recently that was 30 seconds into the second round, he's lost by decision. So he's really a one and done. First round, he needs to get it done. Otherwise, he kind of looks like he fatigues. And that's something that we haven't seen, like I said, much with Pyfer, but it's something that I'm pretty convinced he'll be okay to keep going later into those rounds. The grappling also helps him very much, that if he can get it to the ground, that's a big advantage he has over the guy that's definitely more of a striker and a stand-up guy.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see Joe Pyfer attempt takedowns. A lot of the narrative surrounding this fight is that it's going to be two guys who go in there and bang it out and see who drops first. But in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, well, that's very great for the guy who can't grapple. Like, with all due respect to Hassan, he's a below average grappler. That sounds great for that guy. But what's to say that Joe Pyfer doesn't go, well, I could get in this 50-50 fight, swing, and try and knock him out, which he probably can do, and that may be the way the fight goes. But why wouldn't he just go, I'll take this big guy down, get on top, and submit him? So, personally, I took a little stab at the Joe Pyfer submission plus 600. So that's a small little play that I've got this week. Hedged it out with the Joe Pyfer point spread, which is juiced up to minus 310, I believe. So it's just enough to get back the sprinkle if he wins by knockout. So that's I'm not just sitting here waffling about thinking he could win this fight by submission. I actually think I did put a little bit of spare change down on it because it is such a big number, and it to me it's a very, very easy path to victory that we may see come fight night. So long story short, I've got Pyfer just about everywhere this fight goes, barring Al Hassan, barring he catches him with a big shot.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And one other thing I want to say that's kind of another thing that's in Pyfer's favor, he's 6'2". Al Hassan's 5'10", so it's a very big size difference, got a 2-inch reach advantage, which makes a difference in these kind of fights where it's a stand-up guy can keep him a little more at distance, and those shots will be coming in a little from a little further away, maybe a little more predictable even at times. And if he
Mhm.
does get close in range, you can grapple him, do that stuff. So I agree with you. I think Piper has this kind of everywhere, and I do have him winning by
Yeah.
a finish. I don't think it'll be a decision, but I'm not sure if he's going to get the submission or get a knockout.
Yeah. And to your point about the size, LS on a guy who throws massive, massive hooks. So the size disadvantage and the reach disadvantage makes that even harder
Yeah.
to accomplish. So just another thing in Piper's favor. All right. Moving down the card, we have Alex Morono and Joaquin Buckley. This is going down at welterweight. These are two guys who have been kind of sitting just outside the rankings for a significant period of time. It seems like they both get some pretty favorable card placements. Both guys have fought in front of fans. I believe both guys have fought on pay-per-views. Buckley, relatively big name, because he's got that highlight reel knockout over Impa Kasanganov, which is one of the most impressive knockouts in UFC history. Don't know how somebody lands that, but credit to Buckley. So I think this is another interesting fight. And how do you see this one going down?
I do think it'll be a stand-up fight. I know that Alex Morono is a little more well-rounded. He can do that grappling. He does have submission victories. Joaquin Buckley does not, so he's definitely going to try and keep it on the feet. As you said, that spinning back kick, beautiful piece of stand-up fighting there from a very bad position. His last fight out got a head kick knockout as well. So he's definitely trying to keep it up. He kind of seems to either get knocked out or gets the knockout. It doesn't have many long, boring fights. He's always go, 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 go. And I think that's something we'll see this weekend. But I do think Morono being a little more well-rounded. He lost his 2 fights ago, but came back and got the submission against Tim Means, which that's not a bad win by any means. That's a pretty good win. But I don't know. I do think that it's going to be one of those more so than the Dawson and Green fight, where I do think Dawson's probably going to win that pretty comfortably. This is the one that I'm kind of like, I don't really know which way it's going to go because I can see both guys winning it in a couple different ways.
Yeah. And both guys have been knocked out too.
Yeah.
Like you said, Buckley is a guy who, for the most part, either wins by knockout or gets knocked out. Um, he got knocked out badly against Kevin Holland. I believe he got knocked out by Alessio Di Churio. That's not his name, but I've gotten the habit of calling him Alessio Di Churio. Not his name at all. I know that, so don't come at me for incorrectly saying his name. Um, so yeah, and Alex Morono, a guy who got knocked out by Santiago Ponzinibbio after winning the first 2 rounds very clearly. So I think both guys are live to win by knockout and lose by knockout. And I think it's going to be an interesting fight. Ultimately, I'm leaning towards the Buckley side because I think he's more athletic and has a little bit more power. So I think Buckley is going to be a little bit better at getting on the inside and landing some shots just because he can close distance so quick because he is athletic. And Buckley's also been making improvements, in my opinion. And I think that is kind of evident by him moving down from 185 down to 170, because at 185, he was really undersized, fighting a lot of guys who he just could not compete with, just purely based on size. Like the Nasruddin Imavov fight. Imavov is an average, maybe slightly above average guy in terms of height for that division. Nasruddin just kept him at range all day long and picked him apart. But he saw that, noticed that, and said, well, I need to go down to 170. And he's a guy with a lot of muscle. Cutting those extra 15 pounds probably can't be great. So I do give Buckley a little bit extra credit for showing that he's putting in that effort and he's determined because he's dropping those extra 15 and getting to 170. So I'm leaning with Buckley here, and I think he gets it done by knockout. And that's just because I think whoever wins this fight is getting it done by knockout. It's not necessarily a knock on Morono. If Morono wins, he probably wins by knockout too. But I'm leaning towards Buckley. Nothing too, overconfident. And it's hard to be incredibly confident on this fight, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I probably am leaning Buckley as well, even though, like I said, this one's really a toss up. I can see it going either way, but it's interesting you mentioned like his move down, obviously, smaller guy. He still has a 3-inch height difference against Morono, who is 5'11" to 5'8" of Buckley. So there's that still, but the fact that he comes down from a division where he was fighting bigger guys, heavier guys, and he still was managing to knock them out. He can definitely do that, as you saw in his first fight back in welterweight. He can still has that knockout power and can still compete with anybody probably in this division. And I'm gonna lean with him to get it done. Probably a knockout as well. Doesn't seem like this one goes the distance at all.
Yep, I'm with you. Moving down the card to two guys that we've already touched on a little bit, at least briefly, Drew Dober and Ricky Glenn, or Rick Glenn. R- Ricky Glenn likes to add and drop the Y on his first name. Sometimes he's Rick, sometimes he's Ricky. So you never really know with Mr. Glenn. But this is an interesting fight in the aspect that these two guys are both guys who are known for being durable, and they're both coming off the first knockout loss in their career. And they're both 34 as well. So it's not like either guy's 38, 39 looking to bounce back. They're both still at a reasonable age. A little bit, it's not like they're 29, but 34, you're not done and out yet. Both guys looking to bounce back. So, Jerry, are you excited for this fight? And what do you think is going down here?
I am excited, mostly because I really like watching Drew Dober fight. He seems to always have entertaining fights, whether it was the Islam fight, which once again kind of outmatched, but still took him to the third round there. So that was kind of surprising. Last one out, he was a loss to Matt Frivola, but as we talked a couple weeks ago, Frivola's on the rise, and he looks like one of those very dangerous guys that could continue moving up the ranks. And still has that win over Bobby Green, which is always an impressive thing, especially getting the knockout finish. So I'm more excited for Drew Dober than necessarily Ricky Glenn, but both these guys have a lot of fights in their bag. And it's just the fact that for me, Ricky Glenn has been a little too inconsistent recently. Did have a draw against Grant Dawson, but otherwise it's pretty much been alternating wins and losses. With that being said, he lost last time, so I guess he's due for a win if the pattern was to continue. I still don't think he does. I think Drew Dober gets this done. I have it as a decision at the moment, but I'm swinging back and forth between that and a knockout finish.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things that really stands out, if you just look at these guys, his record or watch film or whatever, the level of competition for Drew Dober has been much, much higher. He's been a guy who Drew Dober has, sometimes he's ranked, sometimes he's in that 12, 13, 14, 15 spot of those lightweight rankings. Sometimes he's just outside, but regardless, he is fighting really, really tough opponents. And like you said, Islam, Bobby Green, I believe he's fought Brad Riddell, Matt Frivola, McKinney is losing fights, but Terrence McKinney is dangerous in that first round, and that fight was wild. So Drew Dober always getting in entertaining fights with the top guys. Ricky Glenn, very, very durable, but his wins are not as impressive to me just because of the level of competition. He's never gone out there and knocked out a Bobby Green by example. So I do lean with Dober here, and that's part of it. But also, I mean, you look at these two guys just next to each other. Drew Dober, with all due respect to Ricky Glenn, Drew Dober looks like an athlete. Ricky Glenn doesn't necessarily look like an athlete. So Drew Dober is going to be the much bigger, the much stronger, the much more powerful, the much faster guy. And as Drew Dober has said, he comes into every fight with a left hook and a chin. And that may be enough to win him this fight.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he's tied with the most knockouts in lightweight history of UFC with Dustin Poirier. I think he can get it done and make it a record of his own, get his ninth knockout in this division. And there's a reason why. Like you said, he is one of those guys that's just constantly right on the fringes of being in the rankings and not. I think a knockout win here over Ricky Glenn or Rick Glenn, whatever he's going with at the moment, could be one to push him back into that conversation for at least the top 15.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I'm riding Drew Dober here, and I didn't say this, but I've got the knockout just because I respect his power a lot. We've seen both guys obviously had their chin cracked recently, but I think Drew Dober is the one that's more capable of cracking a chin than Ricky Glenn. And Ricky Glenn doesn't really have the power of someone like Matt Frivola, who Matt Frivola, if he hits you and he lands square like he did against Dober, ooh, he can crack. All right. The last fight on the main card, which we've seen as if you're anyone who's betting out there, we've seen a lots of line movement. We started with Bill Algeo as the favorite. Now we've got Alex Hernandez on the favorite. It's kind of been ping pong a little bit, lots of line movement, so a lot of split opinion on this fight. Jerry, where's your head at when you see Alexander Hernandez and Bill Algeo?
God, really, I don't know. I think I'm leaning more to Bill Algeo just because it seems like he's had a little bit of maybe better wins, more competition recently. Because Jim Miller was the guy that Alex Hernandez beat last, but before then, he lost both of his fights last year. Sure, Bill Algeo won his last one against TJ Brown, but he also fought 3 times last year. So it's kind of winning 2 of those. And I'm leaning him because I just have a feeling he's got a little something extra and he's more ready to fight this time. Both fought, or he fought last in April. Alex Hernandez fought last in February. It's been a long layoff for both of these guys, but I think it's the fact that he's been fighting regularly and up against good competition for Algeo. But I understand why the betting line keeps going back and forth. It's a very, very close, even match.
Yeah. This is one that I've kind of went back and forth on in my head. Personally, um, I like to watch film. I enjoy doing it. And before I watched film, I was leaning towards Aljo. I watched some film and flipped towards Hernandez. And I was really, and the reason for that is because I was really impressed with Alexander Hernandez's performance against Jim Miller.
Yeah.
That was just something that I kind of looked over, and I went back and reread what I wrote for things we learned for, and that fight was in that article from that event. I don't remember, UFC Vegas, whatever. At this point, there's who knows which one it was. And when I reread what I wrote right after that fight, I had very positive things to say as well. So I saw it on rewatch, liked it afterwards as well. So the thing really that I liked about that fight was Alexander Hernandez has always been someone who struggled in the gas tank department. Billy Quarantillo, he cooked him in the second round. Hernandez won the first round, and then Quarantillo picked up the pressure and cooked him in round 2. In the Jim Miller fight, Alexander Hernandez fought for all 15 minutes, and he fought hard. In the last minute of that fight, he slips. Jim Miller gets on top and gets his back and takes his back. And instead of giving up, instead of being too tired, Jim Miller's attacking that rear naked choke, and Hernandez is able to fight out, get to his feet. And that is something that's really impressive to me for someone that has struggled with their gas tank. And he took that fight on short notice as well. So I was really impressed with that. Now he's going back down to 145. And I think if he can show the same level of cardio that he showed in the Miller fight, I think he wins just because he's so talented. He's got power. I think he hits Algeo with a lot of big shots. But if his cardio doesn't hold up, he's going to probably beat Algeo up for the first round, fall apart in round 2. Algeo finishes him. So in my eyes, this fight comes down to what's your opinion on Alexander Hernandez's cardio? And then when the fight comes, how does this cardio look? I think your answer to that question tells you who wins the fight and who you predict to win the fight. I bought in on Hernandez. I may be wrong. So, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and I mean, that's all good points. I haven't really gone through and done a lot of research into these two guys fighting. I kind of just study who they fought, all that sort of stuff. I haven't watched any film on Hernandez. I'm sure I've watched him fight in the past, so I can remember watching Bill Algeo a little bit more, which is partial bias there, which is kind of why I'm leaning towards him. But if Hernandez can keep it going, it's going to be an interesting one. Like I said, I'm still leaning Algeo, but I can see both these guys getting it done. Both of them go to decisions more often than not. Sure, the last one for Algeo was a finish, but that was still like midway through the second round of a 3-round fight. I would give the cardio advantage probably slightly towards him, but it's hard to knock Alex Hernandez for his cardio because he does get stuff done. Went 3 rounds with Jim Miller, and even his last 2 losses were both into that second round, and it wasn't like he was getting too tired from what I can remember.
Hmm. Yeah, and like like I said, this fight has been ping pong and back and forth on the betting lines. Lots of movement in the last 24 hours or so. So I think both guys have a reasonable path to victory here. And if I hypothetically, if I don't watch the card, which I will, but hypothetically, say I don't watch it and you tell me on Sunday morning, Bill Algeo won or Alexander Hernandez won, I'm not going to be entirely shocked at all. So I think we got a close fight on our hands, and I think it's also going to be an entertaining one. More often than not, these two guys are two guys who are in line for exciting fights. So that is also worth noting for a fight that's going to kick off the main card.
And that seems like a very much a trend in this card. Even in the prelims, it's very exciting fights. Can get finishes anywhere, but for the most part, it's like we said before, it's just missing that headlining main event, which I still don't get me wrong. I like this Bobby Green and Grant Dawson fight, but it's not the kind of level we're expecting and wanting to see as the main event.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a knock on those two guys. But when you look like historically, these two guys aren't guys who fight in a lot of main events.
Yeah,
Like this is Dawson's first, and I'm more interested in that just because I'm interested to see how he looks in 5 rounds, like we talked about earlier. But Bobby Green, I believe his own. I'd have to go back and double check this, but I believe his only main event was the Islam fight.
yes.
And that card was not built around him. He stepped in on short notice. And credit to him for that, because it takes a lot of balls to step in on short notice. It was less than a week to fight Makachev. That was supposed to be RDA, I believe. So the
Uh,
level that
yeah, it was Derek Benil Dariush was
oh
originally for that one, if I can remember correctly.
no, him and RDA have had a history of
Yeah.
cancellations on both sides of that. But regardless, these two guys aren't really guys you expect to see in main events. And right now, the UFC is putting all their fight night main events on pay per view main cards, which gives us some pretty good pay per views coming up. So I'll give them credit for that.
Yeah, like some of the ones on the upcoming pay per views could very well be fight night headliners. Like even the Ankalaev Johnny Walker. Just looking at some of the ones in
Hmm.
this upcoming UFC 294 card,
Yep.
couple there.
Hmm. And before we move on to our news, let's wrap this card up with one more thing we're looking out for, or that stands out, whether it's main event, prelims, first fight of the night, however you want to do it. What's the one more thing that stands out to you before we move on?
Hmm. Honestly, the fight I'm probably looking forward to the most is I do like watching Ion Kudaleba fight.
Hmm.
Always seems to be some sort of finish, knockout, submission whenever he fights, whether he's on the right side or the wrong side of it. So that fight against Philip Lins, I'm excited for that, and I think that's a great one to kind of end the prelims because Lins in his own matter has some good wins on a 3-fight win streak, so it
Hmm.
should be a good one there.
Yep, I think that's going to be a very entertaining fight. Um, that was supposed to be on the main card,
Yeah,
and I know that because I wrote the preview for it. And then after I wrote the preview for it, they moved it to the prelims. It was,
wow.
I don't know. I think they're just trying to do more. Um, I honestly don't know. And maybe it's because they're trying to do more 5-fight main cards. They've kind of went back and forth. Are we going to do 5-fight UFC or fight night main cards? Are we going to do 6-fight? This one has 5 fights. I believe the last one have had 5 fights too. So, but I wrote the preview for it. There were supposed to be 6 fights. Then they knocked it down to the prelim, and I was like, great, good thing I wrote the preview for that. But
Yeah.
that's me being selfish. Anyways, I agree with you. I think that fight will be fun. Mine will be Mateus Mendonca versus Nate Manas. I like Mateus Mendonca. Really impressive knockout on Dana White Contender Series. On the wrong side of his debut against Javid Basharat, but Basharat's a tough guy for a UFC debut. So I'm interested to watch that fight because I like Mendonca, impressed with him, and I'm interested to see if he can bounce back. So that will be my fight that I want to shout out. All right.
Anyway, it's going to be a fun card, definitely worth watching. So,
Yep, I'm with you. And then moving on to our news, the kind of more surprise. Well, maybe this isn't surprising. We can get your thoughts on it too. But Derek Brunson released from the UFC a couple weeks ago. I believe we talked about it on the show. I don't remember
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm pretty sure
Um,
we did.
but he was released, and shortly after, he's already signed with the PFL. He has a fight booked against Ray Cooper. It's going to be a trilogy, and that is going to be on the PFL's year-ending card. That's when they have all their season finales, since they do the season format. They've got some showcase fights on there that aren't parts of the tournaments, because there's only I don't know how many, 6 maybe tournament finales. That's not enough for a card, so they throw some showcases on there. Ray Cooper and Derek Brunson will be one. And then Derek Brunson will be participating in the light heavyweight tournament next year, and he will be in there for the $1 million. So, Jerry, what is your reaction to finding out that Derek Brunson is now the newest PFL fighter?
I mean, it seems like this is happening more and more. I know there's a lot of talk with Bellator doing their 300th or like Bellator 300 upcoming, and might be potentially the end of Bellator. I've read rumors about. So that's one thing that we'd see a lot of fighters go from the UFC, potentially go there, go to one. PFL now is signing a lot of guys out of the UFC who get released. Saw it, Francis Ngannou, now Derek Brunson, definitely a couple others. But it's more that money talks in this aspect where you win that tournament, you get $1 million or something like that. It's definitely not surprising we're seeing so many guys over. I am interested for this fight. I was looking at it. You said beforehand what this was their trilogy fight.
Yeah, I believe so.
I was yeah. From what I'm seeing, like looking at who they fought, I think it might be that it's Ray Cooper the third.
Oh,
Because
well,
if
my bad.
we were talking about that earlier, and I was looking for it, I was like, I could have sworn we were saying like, but
I saw.
I thought I'd seen something that they had fought before, but maybe seeing
Yeah,
now it looks like it isn't. But
I saw the 3 on the graphic and thought it was a trilogy. That's on me. That's my bad.
but either way, like this is a good one for Derek Brunson to kind of not ease his way back, but get his way back in because he's lost 2 straight and was knocked out in both of those. This won't be an easy fight because Ray Cooper is kind of a knockout guy in his own rights. It's going to be interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple more guys head over that way shortly.
Yeah. I'll start with Derek Brunson. Derek, I don't know. This caught me by surprise because he was supposed to fight Roman Dolidze. He gets cut, and then they scrap that fight and then rebook Dolidze and Cannonier. So that was already kind of fishy. He's already got another fight booked, and I have to look to see when the Dolidze and Brunson fight fell through. But you know, it raised some red flags. I assumed he was retiring, so I was surprised to see him back because Brunson also has talked openly about retirement, and he was like, going into the Cannonier fight, he was like, "This is my run for a title. If I lose, I'm gonna retire." And he got knocked out badly. That was vicious.
Oh,
Cannonier like knocked him out and was throwing elbows from the top that were gruesome, and his corner throws in the towel. And then the Dricus Duplessis fight, he looks good at points in that fight, and he lands some takedowns, but he ends up throwing bombs with Duplessis on the feet, which is an awful idea.
yeah.
He gets tired and he starts getting beat up, and ref stops it as the corner's throwing in the towel again. And to me, it's just all, and I respect that. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think that's a sign of them being very conscious about his health because he's on the verge of retiring. You don't need him taking extra damage. So I was surprised to see that. And then I was surprised that they were willing to give him a fight in November. I believe that is supposed to take place instead of just waiting for the light heavyweight tournament. Because now what happens if you get knocked out by Ray Cooper and you're going into that light heavyweight tournament after coming off your 3rd consecutive knockout loss? And the light heavyweight tournament guarantees you 2 more fights. Unless you up and leave in the middle of the tournament, you're guaranteed 2. And if you make it, you get your 3rd. You win that, you get a 4th. So now he's got 2 knockout losses. Could be on a 3rd. We don't know. We have to see. But regardless, he's now signing up for 2 at minimum fights. We saw that happen with Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes was on the down spiral, had many consecutive knockout losses. He goes over to PFL, gets beat up badly, gets stopped by leg kicks, and then he's fighting 2 months after he gets stopped by leg kicks. If you're getting stopped by leg kicks on Saturday, you're not training on Monday. So he didn't even get a full camp, a full turnaround. So that's what I don't like about these Asian guys going in to the PFL tournament. So the one thing I will say is that last year, the PFL lost the majority of its light heavyweight division to USADA suspensions. So maybe I don't know what the field's going to look like next year. I'd have to go back and see. Santos was one of them. Christoph Jutko, I believe. A handful of guys got suspended for PEDs. So depending on what their suspensions look like, Derek Brunson may be the best fighter in a very weak division. And the light heavyweight division in the PFL, assuming those guys don't come back, is the easiest tournament to win at the same time. So very interested to see what we get from Derek Brunson coming up. And to your point about Bellator, who knows what the hell is going on with Bellator? I've seen reports saying they're just folding, and I've seen reports saying the PFL is buying them. So that's why we haven't necessarily talked about it on the show yet, because there's so many conflicting reports where who really knows what's going on. But if Bellator goes under, there's probably going to be a handful of those guys that go over to the PFL. Maybe the PFL buys them. Whatever. I think we're in for an interesting time in terms of MMA free agency.
Yes, we are. And I mean, it all started with that whole Francis Ngannou situation. Really, like, to me, I think it did at least. But it's gonna be interesting. And going back to just one more thing on this Brunson and Cooper fight, it's like it would make sense if they brought him in, have him fight like another veteran, aging guy. They're having him fight a guy who's 9 years younger. This just does not seem like a good situation for Derek Brunson at all. And it could be like, if he gets knocked out that bad, does he just retire? I feel like he has to. If he gets dominated and KO'd there.
That's a great point for someone who's already talked about retirement.
Yeah,
I think that's a very real possibility that he doesn't make it to that tournament next spring. I believe they start. So the one thing that I kind of want to add here, this is a brief rant, not necessarily a rant, maybe more of a statement. Two things actually. I just came up with another one in my mind. One, a lot of these UFC guys that are leaving the UFC and getting paid elsewhere, they get treated very poorly by these other organizations. And the UFC isn't perfect, and they have some suspect matchmaking of their own. But I think what a lot of guys that leave the UFC don't realize is that if you're not 100% in your prime, you're going to get struck with some bad matchups. Yeah. You're not going to get easy fights. One has their whole weight cutting shenanigans where every time you see a former UFC fighter fighting in one, they're magically fighting a guy that's looks to be a weight class or 2 weight classes higher. Happened to DJ, happened to Eddie. These guys go over to the PFL. They milked Marlon Moraes in the PFL. Looks like they're going to try and do that with Derek Brunson as well. So I get why people leave. Guys like Shane Burgos leave at good points. So it's not everybody, but a lot of time these other promotions just want their fighters to beat former UFC fighters, and they use them in that regard. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I completely agree with that aspect of it. Is you can then have a guy who might not be very well known, but he's gone out and beat a former UFC fighter. They'd be like, great, he's beaten a guy who was at the top of the entire fight game, and now it kind of looks like, okay, our promotion's getting a little better. Maybe we're catching up to the UFC little by little, but it's still, at the end of the day, I don't think they are necessarily. Maybe one is probably the closest to this point, but even then, it's that whole, you'll never know unless they do a full-on champion versus champion tournament, which I personally would love to see that. I think that'd be great. See these guys from all the different all the different promotions go at it with each other. But then we get a boxing situation where it's, oh, you have this guy's the WBC, the WBO, the who knows what champion. And
yeah, that the what promotions are the best are really, those can be crazy discussions because everyone values something different. Yeah. Sometimes people just want to know who the best fighter in the world is. Some people want the deepest roster. Some people want the best product, the best production. It's a whole nother discussion of itself. The last thing I'll add is that it's crazy. This is going to be a very quick statement because I don't want to go into the rant here. But Nate Diaz said he doesn't want to fight in the PFL because it's the B leagues and that he won't fight Jake Paul in the PFL. I hate how that is being switched around as a tactic of Nate Diaz being scared of Jake Paul. I'll just leave it at that because that is the most embarrassing thing of all time. Nate would fight Jake Paul in a parking lot. He just doesn't want to fight in the PFL because it ruins his potential of going back to the UFC. Yeah. So you can't do business with a competitor and then go back to the UFC. It doesn't work that way.
I hadn't even seen that he didn't want to fight. I missed that completely. But yeah, I think if they're gonna fight, I don't think it matters to Nate Diaz really where it is. He would fight him, like you said. He'd fight him. He would have fought him right after in that boxing ring. Throw on the small gloves, get another referee in there, and he would have been ready to go at it then. So I mean, I think I like that thought that it's who they do it. It would have to be in the UFC because he's already said he wants to fight McGregor again. Wants to fight other people already. I don't think we see the last Nate Diaz in the UFC by any means. Yeah. And had he not have fought Jake Paul in PFL, I don't think it would have happened.
Yeah, maybe they even do it in real fight promotions and they do it on their own, maybe outside of the UFC. But Nate Diaz isn't fighting in the PFL. No. All right, now that I've gotten us thoroughly off track, we have the final piece of news that came out over the last week or so. Well, within the last week since we last talked on Friday, we have the first fight booked for UFC 297, which is, I don't know if it's official, but lots of rumors of Canada. Those rumors seem pretty legit. A lot of guys have said they've been offered that date. A lot of Canadian guys want to ask the UFC to fight, and they told them, no, we're going to save you for January. Guys who wanted to fight November, December, they said, wait 2 months. We're going to need you for a show. Lots of rumors that's going down. In Canada, rumors about the main event, but the one fight we had that's official, Arnold Allen, Movsar Evloev. I know you're a big Arnold Allen guy because he is one of the biggest English MMA fighters out there. You obviously support the English. So what's your reaction to this being the next fight for Arnold Allen?
I mean, it's a tough fight. Evloev is, perfect still, 17-0. He does go to decision a lot, and the only 2 losses of Arnold Allen's careers were decision losses. I think they made a mistake giving him the Max Holloway fight, personally. If they wanted to build up his stock, they wouldn't have given him Max Holloway because it still seems that it's Volk, Max, everybody else until we see otherwise. So that aspect was bad, but I'm excited for this fight. It's a great one to have on the first pay-per-view of the year. Does look like it's going to be in Toronto, I think is the city that they're talking about. But, looking at his wins, he knocked out Calvin Kattar, knocked out Dan Hooker, went the distance in one with Sadiq Youssef, who's on next week's Fight Night main event. So all 3 good wins, and up until that Max Holloway loss, he was 19-1. Hadn't lost since June of 2014. He's clearly doing what he needs to do inside the UFC and outside. He's been in the UFC for quite a while, and it's only just now kind of getting up to the title picture. And a win for either of these guys can very well put them in that possible next title shot, depending on what happens with Volkanovski and Topuria. Depends if Volk wins. Does he go up, fight Islam? What happens with all that stuff? But one of these guys could very well be next in line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will. I think that Ilia Topuria should write Arnold Allen a handwritten thank you note, because Arnold Allen went out there and lost to Max Holloway, and the UFC, and that was Max Holloway also beat Calvin Kattar, which to a lesser extent was a similar situation, but it was Arnold Allen is our top prospect right now. At that point in time. He was the prospect, maybe the prospect that was closest to reaching the title. And that may be a better way to phrase it. But they decided, hey, let's throw him out there against Max Holloway. Max Holloway beats him, and then they go, and actually, Alexander Volkanovski publicly said, Max, stop beating my contenders. Max, I'm not going to have anyone to fight if you beat all my contenders after you beat Arnold Allen. And now, Ilia Topuria gets a title shot without fighting Max Holloway. Now, who knows? Max Holloway wins, Max Holloway loses that Topuria fight. Regardless, Ilia Topuria just got a title fight off beating Josh Emmett.
Yeah.
You got to skip the Max Holloway step, which is a pretty big step to get over. It's a hurdle, not a step. So I think Topuria owes Arnold Allen a thank you note because Arnold was the guy who kind of lost that fight. Was a very, very good fight, but he lost that fight, and the UFC decided, all right, enough of that. So credit to Arnold Allen for taking that risk. And as far as this fight booking goes, I'm kind of disappointed. The fight that I wanted was Arnold Allen and Yair Rodriguez. That was one that I thought was very good. Both lost to Max Holloway. Yair coming off the loss to Volkanovski. I thought that made a level of sense. Ortega also up there. Meanwhile, Evolev's getting a top 5 fight with a win off of he's got wins over Ige and short notice win over Diego Lopez. So I don't know that he's earned this step up yet. I think you have to go through a Calvin Kattar or a Josh Emmett possibly before you get this high in their rankings. But at the same time, he passes the eye test and is getting rewarded for that. So credit to him for that, and credit to him for taking that Lopez fight on short notice after Bryce Mitchell was forced to pull out. But I think there are better matchups that could have been made. Still, come January, I'm going to see this on the fight card and go, that's going to be a fun fight, and I'll be excited. I just think they could have worked this a little bit differently.
Yeah, you mentioned the whole thing with Bryce Mitchell having to pull out. I wouldn't have minded if they just ran that back and actually had that one between Evelev and Bryce Mitchell, whereas you have Arnold Allen fighting Ortega, Yair, someone like that. But with that being said, I don't know if the UFC would want their prospect to then go out. Because say Volk does beat Topuria, the only other guy in that top 5, 6 that he hasn't fought is Arnold Allen. And if he goes out and fights one of the like a Yair or an Ortega and loses, that just pushes him back even further down the pecking order, and it's even longer for someone for Volk to fight. Maybe we get a 4th fight with Holloway, and who knows, if Max wins out, he might have a 5th and a 6th, and God knows how many more fights.
Yeah, I don't think the UFC is interested in that 4th Max fight, at least not yet. Maybe Max Holloway whips off 2 more and we're having a different discussion. But yeah, I don't think that's something they're interested in right now. The thing that I'll add to the back of that is 2 things actually. Is Volkanovski 155 is still a real possibility as well. Who knows whether it's going to be Gaethje or Volk, or in all honesty, I think if Volk fights on that January card, Gaethje's got him beat by 3 months. You know, Gaethje can start angling for that fight. They can start working on that fight, assuming Islam wins. Meanwhile, Volkanovski's going, well, once I win in January, it's a little bit of a different discussion. So it may hurt Volk in terms of getting that Islam fight. And the other thing that I'll add is if Volkanovski and Topuria are the main event of this card, these guys find themselves in a great position. You're on the same timeline as the champion. If you win, maybe you call out the champion. And if Ilia Topuria has to pull out, I imagine one of these two is the backup. We don't know who it is, whether it's Allen or Evelev. I'd probably lean Arnold Allen being that guy, but one of these 2 guys is probably the backup secretly.
Yeah. I mean, never want to wish ill will on anybody, but it would be interesting to see what happened if Topuria had to pull out of this fight, or even Volk for that matter.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I just have one other thing I want to throw out there while we're talking about all the title pictures. All the talk of Islam wanting to go up to 170 and fight the winner of Colby Covington and Leon Edwards. What do you make of that? Because that's just something else, because he has all these guys challenges lined up if he does beat Oliveira again, which I do think he will. I think he'll be relatively straightforward like the last one.
Yeah. I don't think Islam has a bad case to go up to 170. You know, he was willing to take on the guy going from 145 to 155. But my issue with that is the state of those 2 divisions.
Yeah, exactly.
You have you have Gaethje, who has earned a title shot without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
You have Volkanovski, who you could argue should have gotten the immediate rematch if he beats, because the common thought process this whole time was that Volkanovski beats Rodriguez, who we have to remember Islam has not fought since that original fight. Volkanovski has. Volkanovski's been the more active guy. The thought was Volkanovski beats Yair, we're running him right back up to 55 because Yair had the interim belt, so they honored that. So 155, assuming Volkanovski doesn't lose, has two great challengers. Meanwhile, 170, you have Bilal Muhammad, who has, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, earned a title fight, and you have Shavkat Rakhmonov, who's knocking on the door of being there and may be there by the time Bilal gets his shot. So I just think you have two divisions with so many contenders that if you change the timeline, and let's not pretend like Leon or Islam are super active guys.
Yeah.
If Islam holds two belts, with all due respect to Islam,
it's going to be a drag.
It's going to be a snail's pace for both divisions. Two divisions with a ton of contenders.
Yeah.
So that's my issue with it. The fight itself, Leon or Colby versus Islam, it's a fun fight. So I would just like to see these divisions that finally have contenders, right? Volkanovski came up because 155 didn't have contenders, right?
They do.
Usman was doing rematches because the division didn't have contenders. Now we've got an excess of defenders. Let's see the champions reign. So it's nothing against Makhachev, rather the states of those divisions. So
yeah, I agree. I do think it would be a little bit of slowdown, and there's so many guys, not even just the top ranked guys who are kind of expected for the next title shot. But if you have Islam running both, then there's all these young prospects coming up as well, especially in the welterweight division. That it just slows down everything, and who knows what would happen next.
And it works when Volkanovski does it because he is so committed to remaining active. That guy had surgery after his Yair fight, and then was immediately asking to fight in October. And then they said, no, you can't fight in October. And he immediately said, I want to fight before the end of the year. Give me December. And they ended up giving him January. So it's a little bit easier to do that when you have a guy that's so active. And Volkanovski going up has not hurt the 145 division one bit.
No,
now, go ahead.
If anything, he's spiced that division up. He's given Topuria time to get into that title shot. Obviously, that Yair and Josh Emmett had their shots at the interim belt. Kind of kept everything moving, and it worked out perfectly for everyone in that situation.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that I will add that I don't think many people are thinking about is, like you mentioned, who knows what's going on with Bellator. But Bellator's 155-pound champion who fights at UFC 300 is Usman Nurmagomedov, who I don't know the relation to Islam and Khabib, to be honest. I assume there's some relation, but I know they're friends and training partners. I think this may be a situation where Islam knows how many fights are left on Usman's deal. Islam goes up to 170, wins the belt. He can then vacate the 155-pound belt. Usman Nurmagomedov comes to the UFC, fights one or two guys, earns a title shot. Now you have two teammates and friends at 155 and 170-pound champion. Islam gets double champ status in the middle of that. So that may be an angle that I don't think many people are thinking about, but I think that is a very real angle. And Usman does have the talent to transition in the UFC, and he may be one of the best guys in the world. I don't think he's as good as Islam, but I do think he may be championship caliber. So I think that's another layer here, kind of depending on what happens with Bellator and how that whole situation unfolds.
Yeah, I can see, because I mean, he's 17-0 at the moment, and he is Khabib's cousin. So there is that relationship. And we saw Khabib always saying that Islam's going to come next and take over when he left. Sure enough, that happened. I can see this being the same situation. If Islam moves on, whether it's up a division or retirement or whatever it is, and we see the Usman come in and take over or continue the Russian dominance of the 155-pound division.
Mm-hmm. And that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either, because in the meantime, you would have the opportunity for a Gaethje Volkanovski fight, for example, or a Charles Volkanovski or a Charles Gaethje. There's fun things. There will always be fun things at 155 pounds, even if we have to wait a year, for example, for Usman to come over. So I think that may be an angle that would save this fight, is if Islam said backstage, hey, if I win, I won't hold up both divisions. I will commit to 170. That's a real possibility. So,
Yeah.
all right, we're at an hour, and we covered a lot of bases today.
Yes, we did. We thought we were going to be a shorter episode, but
we once you get me wound up and you start asking me questions, I tend to go long. So we covered 5 fights on the main card. We covered some news stories, and we even got into some hypothetical matchmaking. So we got our bases covered on the Daily Show today. Make sure to check out the website vendettasportsmedia.com. I will have best bets posted shortly in the UFC preview. We already talked about all the fights, but my written thoughts on the fight, if you want to read them, they're in the UFC preview, and it will have my picks, Jerry's picks, Anthony's picks, and Garrett's picks as well. So it's not just a recap of everything we already talked about today. There will be some other opinions in there as well that you can check out. So, but thank you for watching. Subscribe to the YouTube. Follow us on Newsbreak, all the jazz. But thank you. We'll see you next time.